this morning, I spoke about this last year, so what we're going to talk about today is a little bit similar, but it won't be exactly the same. And if you want to at any point stop me and ask questions, please do so. I want it to be more interactive, more like a workshop. So you might want to move a little bit closer together because I'm going to ask you to talk to each other as well. So smile at your neighbors because you're going to be getting to know them as we go through the presentation. So this is our Wellness Wednesday presentation. And today the topic is connection and co-regulation, or as I prefer to call it, being with. And it's a massive topic, and we're only kind of really touching on it today. So let me go back to the page with the books on. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, these are some of the books that I'm familiar with, that I have read or listened to, and also some of these authors have their own podcasts. And I like to cycle, so I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm cycling. So there's a range there of names you might be familiar with. I think probably the most well-known ones are Alfie Kohn. He's become very popular in a lot of parenting circles in the last few years. And also Becky Kennedy with the book Good Inside about how to create intrinsic motivation in your children. So I just want to make it clear that I understand that this is a really emotive topic, and some of you probably know I'm not a parent myself, but I have looked after your children for decades, and I'm very empathetic with the journey of being a parent and how challenging that can be. So there's nothing about judgment happening here. I'm not trying to make you feel anything negative. I'm trying to help, and I want you just to hold space for each other and to hold space for yourself, because as we go through this, some of the things that come up inside us are quite a narrative dialogue in our heads, and I don't want you to feel that negativity from this. So please just be gentle on yourself and just accept, that maybe sometimes things aren't always perfect, but we can learn and we can move forward, and we're all doing the best that we can at that point in time. So with that in mind, and I forgot to bring my sound bowl this morning, I would like you just to take a few minutes to think about your parenting approach. You can do this by yourselves. You don't need to do any conversation for this. And just as you're thinking about it and reflecting on it before we enter the presentation, just keep track of, are you having any negative or judgmental thoughts about yourself? Because part of this presentation is talking about how having that negative response to yourself really isn't helping you as a parent to build a good relationship with your child. So I'll just give you a few moments and just think a little bit about your parenting style, because the next section we're going to be talking about that. We often talk about mindfulness, and really it's not anything mysterious or secretive. It's just really being purposeful and intentional. So that's why I'm just asking you to think a little bit about your parenting before we enter into this. And one of the things that I'm sure some of you will be familiar with, that I like to practice as much as possible, is non-judgment, or as it is known in yoga and Ayurvedic, ahimsa, which is the idea that we're all doing the best that we can, and we can do better. They're not mutually exclusive. And the idea of being non-judgmental and simply kind of observing as an outsider maybe, or somebody who's not emotionally involved, which can be quite tricky at times. And I'm sure some of you will be familiar with that from your well-being practices that you maybe do. So the whole intent of this workshop is to talk about the idea of connection before correction. And being with comes before being taught. So it's the idea that if we have a strong connection and a secure relationship where we feel regulated, then our ability to work with our child and cooperate and collaborate on positive behaviors becomes much easier. So why do connection and co-regulation matter? I'm not going to go over this in detail, but they are very much hand in hand. They cannot really be separated out. You can't have connection without co-regulation, and you can't have co-regulation without connection. And not only do they shape your child's development, they also can be part of the picture of why we often find sometimes that our children go through periods of behavioral challenges. And by the way, everything in here is not just true of parenting, it's also true of teaching. That's why you often see, as teachers, the things that we do are about building relationships as much as they are about teaching and learning, because without that strong relationship, it feels the child doesn't have that security. It doesn't feel safe for the child to make mistakes in the classroom. They don't feel like their teacher is caring about them. And for children of any age, and I think even for us, I know when I've taken courses as an adult, if I have that connection with the course leader, I feel much more invested in it. And it's a much more enjoyable experience. So one of the first things the brain asks from the moment we wake up in the morning, from the moment we're conscious, is, am I safe? And then the next thing is, am I loved? And again, those kind of go hand in hand, right? So remember, it wasn't that many thousands of years ago that we were living in very different situations to where we are now, and there were multiple threats around us the whole time. And for a lot of us today, we also feel some of those threats, maybe in different forms, not in the forms of large animals roaming around or weather that we can't protect ourselves from, but there are definitely threats, small and large, every day as we go about our lives. And I think also in the day and age of social media and 24-hour news, sometimes we kind of become a little bit anesthetized to these kind of messages which are flooding us the whole time. And we kind of like think, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, it doesn't matter if I start my day watching the news. It doesn't have any effect on me. I want to know what's happening in the world. But actually, I have found myself that putting on a nice animal show or a cooking show when I'm getting ready in the morning is a far better option than the news. I like to know about current affairs, but I've learned that having the news on in the background when I'm getting ready in the morning is not a good plan for my mental health. And it's the same for children. Children are coming to school to learn, and they can only learn if they feel safe and they feel loved. And I do understand that often in Dubai, or often anywhere, but in Dubai there's often a lot of pressures. Maybe you have jobs you have to go to yourself, you've got children going to multiple schools, you're trying to balance and juggle a lot of things at one time. The traffic might be bad, or even sometimes with the best plan in the world, you're about to leave the house and you realize your child has forgotten to charge their iPad, or you move out onto the main roads and you realize there's a traffic jam and then you're stuck in the traffic. So there's lots of little things that happen every day that make us fall off that path that we had planned in our heads and evoke an emotional response, which for us as adults makes us feel a little bit edgy and anxious. So you can imagine for children, they have the same effect on children, and also children very, very much pick up on adults' emotions. I don't teach in the classroom as a class teacher anymore, but I know when I did, if something not too great had happened in my life, I would quite often come back in from being away from the classroom at lunchtime or something, and I would find a little note put on my desk with the little, you know, the children, they write, I love you, you're the best teacher in the world, these kind of things. And somehow the child had picked up that I wasn't having a great day, just from my energy, and they wanted to make me feel better. Or sometimes children will want to hug you and want to children pick up very quickly on the energy that the adults around them that they're close to are giving out, even if we're not doing it intentionally. So emotional connection in parenting. So, of course, there's a bond between a parent and their child. That happens even before the child is born. That bond is always going to be the most important thing in the parenting relationship. No matter what comes along the way, that bond that you have as a parent with your child is the strongest bond you'll ever have in your lives. But it's not just about feeling those positive hormones rush about our body that give us that feeling of love and joy. The emotional bond is there for a reason. Biologically, it helps the child to develop and be taken care of. And I think we know ourselves, sometimes things can get in the way of that. Again, going back to how busy our lives are. And I think quite often, sometimes as parents, we just need to take a little bit of time and remind ourselves what's important here. Is it important that I get my child to school on time? Is it important that they have a charged iPad? Or is it important that they go to school feeling loved and cared for? Because they won't remember whether they had a charged iPad. And the teacher might be, oh, why didn't you charge it? But then that moment will be gone. But the feeling of going to school being nagged or whatever happens as a result of not having that charged iPad between you and the child will have more of a lasting impact. So I went over this in more detail last time, but I'm going to go over it fairly quickly today because I want to touch on a few other things. So ways to strengthen connection. This first one is actually research-based. They have actually done studies that show the number of hugs makes a difference. And the recommendation is 12 hugs a day. More, I don't think they looked at whether more are even more effective, but they found that by the time they got to 12, that was where they were really seeing an impact. Try and have those hugs first thing in the morning. Significant times of the day are first thing in the morning, when a child gets home from school. You know, those are the times when they just need reassurance, when they've been apart from you for a while. Lots of activities can be done together. Again, the demands of parenting can make that very hard. But I'm sure that there are times during the week, maybe not every day, where you can find half an hour to sit down as a family and have a meal, or to read a book together, or play games, play board games. Or if you particularly enjoy a sport, ask your child to come and do the sport with you. You know, I know there are some families who parents and children do yoga together. I know I live close to the school on the field there. I often see dads playing football with their children. And I often see parents accompanying their children when they go to sports training activities. This is probably something we all know very, very well already. I have found that the children that I know are pretty switched on about when their parent is paying attention to them and when they're paying attention to their phone or to something else, you know? So I think it doesn't have to be an hour. It doesn't have to be 2 hours. It can be 10 minutes. Just set aside a time which is manageable for you, where there is no technology, distraction-free, you and your child, and you can just spend 10, 15, 20 minutes together. This is what I mentioned before about connecting before transitions. So that's the drop-off time, the pick-up time, maybe if they've been on a play date or something like this. When a child shows emotion, allow it to happen. Emotion is not a bad thing. And the only way we learn how to control our emotions is by experiencing and feeling them. One of the things we talk about with emotions is somatic awareness. And somatic awareness is having the feeling of the emotion in your body somewhere. We all know what tension and anger feels like. We get the achy muscles, or we get the tingly sweats, or our heart beating faster. But we can only learn the signals for those emotions and when they're starting to creep up on us if we're allowed to experience them. And it's through feeling those and getting the sense of, oh, I can feel myself getting upset now, that we then learn to say, okay, now is when I need to start regulating myself. Slow down and enjoy the moment. There's not quite as much wildlife around us here in Dubai as there are in a lot of countries, but I still see quite often when I'm walking home from school, a mum with their kids talking to the cats that live among the trees there, or something else. You know, there are still things that we can notice around us. I'm sure a lot of children were loving the rain last Friday, not just because there was no school, but because they don't see rain very often. I do, and I come from one of the wettest countries in the world, and I still love seeing the rain here. Bedtime's a great time to snuggle up and chat. Often, I know that bedtime can be quite stressful for some families because you've just got in from work and you're trying to get your child in to bed, and sometimes the children don't want to sleep, or they want to get up and have the 5th cup of water, or now they're hungry, and you know, but with time and consistency, things do start to settle down a bit. Showing up for your child, show up is a word we often hear these days. I'm not sure how much we think about it in sense of the family. It's often related to the work environment. Saying I love you. Again, there are studies which show that when affection is shared openly in families, the bonds are strengthened. Set boundaries, rules, and consequences. We'll go into that a little bit more later. Listen and empathize. That can sometimes be really hard. Even though we were all children once, we often forget that something which is tiny to us as adults is really significant to a child. It might be, you know, they might have fallen down and they might not be able to start crying. They might not even have really hurt themselves, but they're probably responding to the shock of something unexpected happening and the way it makes their body feel. I know if I'm on the roads in Dubai, and I'm sure we've all experienced this a lot, and I have a near miss, which is, 10 times a day, then I get that little sense of jolt in my body. And it's not a comfortable feeling. But after 50-odd years, I've learned to kind of recognize that and understand it, and it doesn't cause me too much of an emotional response. But for a child, if something happens unexpected, even though it's a tiny thing to us, they're not so able to process those emotions, and it can really kind of throw their body and their nervous system into a state where they become very emotional. Child and parent rituals. I think that is also tricky in Dubai because I remember when I was a child, and although I've lived overseas for a long time, I did spend my childhood in the same country where I was born, and I had grandparents and aunts and uncles, and those rituals came naturally out of those relationships. You know, my family had things we did at Christmas, my family had things we did during the holidays. I can still remember going to my aunt and uncles, and they had a garden which was almost a forest, and hunting for the Easter eggs and things, you know, so there are those kind of things that you form in a family, which are a little bit harder when you're away from home. Especially now as we head into the holiday season, I think there's a lot of emphasis on creating perfect holiday environments for children. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real and something that the child really can feel and hold in their emotions. And then making time for one-on-one. Now, I know most of you probably have multiple children. I would suggest the best you can is that you try to spend time one-on-one. So maybe mother takes one child, father takes another, or, you know, on a Saturday morning you spend time with this child, on a Sunday morning you spend time with this child. I know for my friends who have older children, they quite often take their children on dates, in the sense that they will go to their favorite restaurant and maybe go to a movie together. They'll take one child out and they'll do that, and then maybe another week they'll do something with the other child. And the children aren't competing for your attention the whole time. And actually, surprisingly, somebody I know who spends a lot of time with their children already actually said to me when she did that recently, her child is now grown up a little bit from the last time she did it, I actually really like my son. He was great to spend time with, which I think is, because we don't often consciously think about our children in that way as individual people. So, We know this, parenting is a unique journey. There's no perfect parents. What works for this mum, what works for this dad, isn't necessarily going to work for you. All of us are individuals. As adults, we've all had a lot of previous experiences in our lives. As children, we're all born with slightly different personalities, our brains function and process things in different ways, and that's okay. So what I would like you to do here is to spend a few minutes. You can talk to each other. I encourage you to talk to each other and talk about what is your parent vision. You might not be familiar with that word in this type of environment, but you know most companies, most organizations, specifically if they're in Silicon Valley or big tech companies and schools in Dubai, they all have a vision. So it doesn't have to be grand words, but have a little think or a little chat. What is your parenting vision? And what is stopping you reach that parenting vision? Maybe some of you had an idea before you became parents of what type of parent you were going to be. Maybe that vision is changing and evolving the whole time. But I do know that probably 99.9% of you at some point feel that you're not being the parent that you want to be. And that's okay. That's totally okay. But until we reflect on it with intention and holding space for ourselves without being judgmental, it's very hard to make progress towards changing that. So I'll just give you a few minutes, and while you're doing that, I'm going to put the next slide up, which is just, these necessarily aren't real ones. I had ChatGPT help me generate them. So just some ideas to help you think about that for a few minutes and have a little chat with each other about it. I will say before you chat, I know talking to strangers can feel very intimidating, but connection between other adults, other people, is the best thing to help us regulate ourselves and to understand. Yeah. Yeah. If you're comfortable doing that, develop those connections. Parenting connections are very important.
My
Okay, guys. I can hear the volume getting louder, so that's fantastic, but we only have a certain amount of time. So last time I did this presentation, I just touched on parenting styles. But today I'm choosing to go into it a little bit more because I think it helps you to reflect on your own experiences of children and where your ideas about what parenting is have come from. So there are 4 different parenting styles which are recognized from an academic or theoretical perspective. Sometimes they're called a little bit different things, but the way that they are demonstrated through your parenting remains the same. So these are the 4 of them here, and most of us are a mix. I think, I'd say most of us, I'm including me in that. I'm not a parent, but the way I interact with children as a teacher is kind of similar to parents. So, this is also relevant for teachers as well. Obviously, so many different things impact on how we choose to react with our children. As I touched on before, our own experiences as children, cultures we come from, the expectations of people around us, even things like TV shows we've watched, or places, countries we visit, and we can see how things are done in different countries. We're exposed to a lot of different information these days, and everybody has a different idea on something, and everybody's idea is bigger and better, and sometimes it's really hard to kind of break it down and decide what's relevant and what isn't. So the first type is the authoritarian, hard word to say, and this is probably what we consider a traditional parenting style, where the parent is to be respected, the child should know how to behave as a child, and really what the child wants isn't a big part of the parenting relationship. Now, this is not saying that this is the wrong style. All of us probably need to use this at some point. There are times when, as parents, we do have to be the parent and be laying down the law and explaining to our child, okay, this time, this is what you're doing, it's not open for discussion. I'm sorry you feel that way, but it's not open for discussion. Now, it gets quite confusing because this one is called authoritative, but it's actually quite a different approach to parenting. It's what we would think of, either you can command your children to respect you, or you can have your children respect you through the relationship that you have with them. So this is the one where through the relationship you have, there is mutual respect, and the children kind of go along with you on the parenting journey. It can take time. It can feel like you're constantly having to answer questions. Especially if you have more than one child. You can imagine for teachers, when they're trying to be like this, and the 20-odd children in the class, and each one has a different question. And then another question. Permissive is where your kids kind of rule the house. You don't really have rules, or if you do, you don't really enforce them. You think your child probably doesn't need a lot of guidance and a lot of input from you. They'll be okay anyway. And they might be. They might be. And then the last one is the uninvolved, where you kind of live in the same house as your child, but you don't really spend much time mindfully in the presence of your child, and you don't really take an interest in their lives. Now, probably all of you are here, sitting here thinking, oh no, I've done that. That's okay. We've all done some of this sometimes. It's like the 80-20 rule. Where are you most of the time? And it's also recognizing, okay, today I was less involved with my child than I wanted to be. My mind was on other things. But tomorrow, I'm going to do better. Yeah. So permissive is where you may be spending time with the child, but your child is more your friend than your child. So your child is like, if they don't want to go to bed, they don't go to bed. Which is great if they don't have to get up for school tomorrow, but as a parent, if you know they've got to get up to go to school tomorrow and learn or do some other event, then you would go to more this style of parenting and you would explain the reasons behind, this is why we have bedtime at 9 o'clock, because you need to get up early and go to school tomorrow. I think it would depend on your child and also the age of the child, because as a child gets older, we want them to become more and more independent. But also, if you go to a year 4 class in this school, you will see children who are this big and children who are this big. Now, the size doesn't really matter, but the point that I'm making there is that there are lots of differences even between one age. Some of them are visible, some of them are not visible. And you as a parent will know, my child is ready to be independent, or my child still needs help with this. I have a nephew who, by the age of 3, was getting himself totally dressed. Now he's 33 nearly. No, he's not. He's 27. He struggles more with motivation. So it's not necessarily even what goes on when they're younger. It's not even necessarily a reflection of what's going to happen when they're older, you know? But you also, with that independence, and we'll come on to it a bit later, you need to choose when you're going to allow your child to be independent. When you're getting ready to go to school on a Monday morning, that's not the time to let your child try and dress themselves for the first time. So it's about balance. Yes, we all want our children to grow up to be independent, to be able to make their own choices, but it's not just about saying, okay, you go and do it yourself. It's a process. I know when I learn new things, I learn them by doing them. And I teach my team in the same way that I learn. I will give them quite a lot of support, and then I will step back and see. And there's this idea called assumed competence or presumed competence, and it's like, let your child have a go, or let my team members have a go, until they show me they can't do it, and step in. But that doesn't mean that I'm just going to say to them, okay, go and write an IEP when they've never done it before. I would show them how to do it, model it for them, give them examples, and then I would judge, is that person now confident in doing that? Do I think they're willing to give it a go? And will they come back to me if they have a problem? Or can I see that that person still isn't feeling confident enough to do it by themselves? And I'll hold their hands for as long as I need to. And that's kind of the same with our children, right? We don't want to overparent them, but we don't want to underparent them either. Like everything in life, it's a balance. Sometimes we make the right decisions, sometimes we don't. So the uninvolved one is really where you, for a better way of saying it, that you don't care. So that's where the difference is between being permissive and being uninvolved. So just emphasizing again that each parenting journey is unique. But I think this first point is really key to remember. Going back to the parenting vision, a lot of us have an idea before our child is born of what kind of parent we're going to be. And when we don't live up to that expectation of what we had in our head, we give ourselves a hard time. And we end up in a bit of a downward cycle sometimes where we just go, what's the point? I'm not winning this battle, I give up. I keep mentioning the same things. You'll see a lot of the same words or words with similar meanings popping up, just to emphasize that, you know, cooperation and collaboration in any relationship, be it with an adult or a child, is really what we're aiming for. Because in all reality, even with our children, as I'm sure most of you have experienced, we can't control them. Maybe when they're small, we can physically control them because they're small enough for us to manhandle if we need to. But that doesn't leave us feeling great. And certainly as they get older, and certainly as they move into the teenage years, you can't control them. In fact, the more you try to control them, it often has the opposite effect. I do think when I say what suits one parent and child might not suit another, I do think it can be really tricky if there's a mum and a dad, or even sometimes grandparents, who have a different idea about what parenting is. That can cause, I know it can cause a lot of conflict within families. But hopefully, you can sit down and talk about it, share those books with your co-parent, and try and end up on the same page, at least most of the time. So I'm just putting up the attachment types here because I can't really talk about connection without mentioning them, but I don't really want to go into them in detail. There's loads and loads of information you'll find if you do a Google search on attachment types. And again, I want to make the point is that although some may be preferable to others, sometimes we're not totally in control of that. I know families, I work with families where there have been bereavements or where there's been divorce, and maybe the parenting style has been hugely affected by that, and it's a shame, but it's not within control of one of the parents. You know, sometimes things just happen. It's the 80-20 principle again. If you're always doing the wrong thing, not great. But you can't always be doing the right thing either. It's like work. We all know we have days when we're more productive and we're less productive. Same with parenting. We have great parenting days, we have terrible parenting days, and hopefully most of the time we have middle of the road, okay parenting days. So obviously this is where we really want to be. Secure attachment is the desire. And those attachment types are developed right from the moment the baby is born, based on how parents respond and react, or not always parents, other caregivers as well, how they respond and react to the child's emotional needs, and how secure the child feels in the parent or the caregiver responding consistently to their needs. Again, with that consistency, it's not going to be 10 times out of 10, but most of the time. Most occasions. And that is how children learn to regulate their own emotions. We could get into the whole sleep issue here, but I'm not going to. I know there's a lot of different proponents of different approaches to trying to get your child to sleep at night. We're going to leave that on the side. Here I'm just talking about the theory behind attachment. So here's another point for discussion. As a parent, are you being in control or being about to control your child? What do you think the difference is? What do you think it might look like if you're a parent who's being in control when they're interacting with their child in their parenting relationship, or if they're being about to control?
I think like being about to control is mostly like authoritative, like
Yes.
control,
Yeah.
what to command. But being in control, like you are focused. You are trying to feel what you're feeling, like trying to see what your kids feeling.
Yeah,
Like-
exactly. So the first is about you being in control. Sorry?
And to move it the way
Exactly. Yeah, being flexible and adaptable. Yeah.
so the child thinks he's controlling, but actually you are.
Yeah,
The
you,
niece is making
you're
it
collaborating.
right.
I think we don't want to let the child feel like they're controlling, but we want the child to feel like we're respectful of their feelings, and we can talk to them, and we can reach a way forward that is good for both parent and child. And the being about to control is very much about being reactive. So here, it's a little bit more explanation. Calm and composed. That's so hard to be, right? I know every time I go somewhere in Dubai at the moment, I feel very uncalm and very uncomposed because the traffic is so bad. I know when I get there I'm going to struggle with parking. I know everybody else is going to be stressed. There's one place that I go regularly where the parking is terrible, and the stress, and everybody in the car park, you see all these fights breaking out between people. So before you even get to the place you're going to, you have to deal with that. And that's what it can be like as a parent, right? Before we even get the children to school in the morning, or we even go to the place we're trying to get to, the birthday party or the cinema or the park or wherever, or the aeroplane. I know a lot of you will probably be going on flights quite soon. Again, this is idealistic, and I 100% get it's idealistic. And then the being about to control is the reacting, trying to enforce your authority, trying to manage the child's behavior through you dictating to the child. So we're not going to go hugely into this today either, but I'm sure you're very used to hearing this idea that all behavior is communication. I wonder if I say to you, have you ever thought about, does your child want to behave badly? Have you ever wanted to behave badly? Think about yourselves as adults. Sometimes we behave badly still, right? What does it feel like for you afterwards? Is it a good feeling? No, right? So our children are people too. So think about the idea, do children really want to behave badly? Are they setting out to behave badly? Yeah, they're reacting to what's going on inside of them. They're trying to learn how to cope with the world. They're just as likely to have bad days as we are. You know? We often talk about children making progress, and it could be progress academically or in other areas of life, and we expect children to go like this. But that's not life, is it? We often go like this. You know, every day is a bit of a roller coaster. And then every day in the week, every month of the year, and so it goes on. Hopefully, we're all moving in the right direction, but we're not moving in the right direction every minute of every day. So I've put in a few questions that I got sent through on the sign-up sheet that I'm just going to go through quite quickly. How are toddler temper tantrums best handled when one is in a rush? Very simple answer, they're not. It is really, really hard, especially with a child who's, you know, just developing their language skills, so it's really, really hard to reason with them. They can be very, very loud. We know that a lot of children, young children, have no real inhibition still, so they often show their displeasure very loudly, which can trigger all these responses in your own brains and in your nervous systems. I think there are times sometimes when you just have to take a step back, go and lock yourself in the bathroom for 5 minutes, make sure the child is safe, but go and lock yourself in the bathroom for 5 minutes, take a deep breath. And also going back to what I mentioned earlier, if you want your child to do things that they haven't done before, practice them before they have to be done. Don't get your child to learn how to tie their shoelaces just before you head out of the door. If you've bought new shoes and they have laces and the child isn't used to tying their shoelaces, give them time to practice that in the evening. How to stay patient when kids have a meltdown? Very, very hard. Very, very hard. And I think the one thing that I keep coming back to when I work with children, because most of the children that I work with have additional needs as well, and they can really find it hard to regulate themselves emotionally, and they often give quite a lot of pushback to adults in their life, not because they're being rude, but because they have such strong emotions. So this is something that I constantly have to be aware of. And I just try and tell myself what I was saying before, the child isn't behaving badly because they want to. Think about what's going on inside the body of that child, their internal systems, for them to be acting in that way. Maybe.
And this is help us to stay patient?
Yes, yeah. It helps you to have that compassion that sometimes disappears when you get a child responding to you in a certain way. And each of you will find things, oh, you know, if my child cries, it doesn't bother me. But then another parent will find that a child crying will get them very anxious, and you'll start to feel your heartbeat faster. Some parents will find the child saying no a trigger. Some parents won't. So it's about going back to this somatic experience of emotions that we have in our body and identifying your own emotions. When my child does that behavior, how does it make me feel? Can I feel myself getting more anxious? Can I feel myself getting more wound up? And I think I mean, they tell you things like when you're doing presentations about how to imagine people in the audience to stop your nerves, right? And it's kind of like that idea with our children. You need some little mantra that you say inside your head that works for you to help you feel compassion and empathy with your child when they're going through that. But also recognizing yourself, this isn't easy for me. But as the adult, we have to be the bigger person. And as we're going to move on to now, we have to learn to regulate ourselves before we can expect our children to regulate. So again, these are similar, right? I will say the last preteen connection and support, it's tricky because I think preteen these days is different from preteen. I mean, a preteen now is maybe 8 years old. They're like a teenager by the time they're 10 years old, right? Nearly? So, and they have all these ideas about, I'm sure now, your kids go on social media. I know I was with a child the other day and they were telling me all these things they wanted for their birthday. I had no clue what they were talking about. But then they kept going on Amazon and finding them and showing me. So children have a lot of things out there that, and I think all we can do is kind of like connect with the children where they are. So in that example, I could have said to the child, I could have made a negative comment, but I said, okay, show me, So we sat together on the iPad and they showed me and we talked about them. And it ended up them saying to me, well, what do you think is so we had a connection over it. And the best way to manage a tantrum after a long and busy day, food. So I know it's best for me when I've had a long and busy day, give me some chocolate and I'll calm down. But for a lot of children, just having something comforting to eat when they walk in the door or some food in your bag that you give them when they come in the car, doesn't have to be a sweet treat. A lot of children in the school actually genuinely like healthy food. When I'm walking around and talking to children about their lunch boxes and they have strawberries and berries, they tell me how much they like them. But food can be a big help, and also hugs. And also space, depending on your child and their age. If I've had a bad day, sometimes I just need space. I'll get in my house, I don't have children, but I have cats. I love my cats, but if I had a bad day, I don't want them in my space. I need a bit of time to calm down. And it's very hard as parents. We want to ask our children as soon as they walk through the door, how did your day go? What was it like? So, signs of emotional dysregulation in children. I've listed them here, but I'm sure I don't need to go into them in too much detail. You've all encountered your children when they're emotionally dysregulated. And I think it's a pyramid, isn't it? It's like an inverse pyramid. You would expect all children to have some emotional dysregulation. In fact, all people, all adults have some emotional dysregulation. But it's the frequency and the strength of that emotional dysregulation as it becomes, it takes over. It blots everything else out from the picture. And it becomes the main way of functioning. Then it becomes problematic for us as families. So this is basically the backbone, and the lady who I took this from is called Sharon Salinas, and it was actually the ADHD book, but I think it is relevant for all children, not just those who have ADHD. The 5 C's, which support you in developing more regulated behaviors with your children. So self-control, learning to manage your own feelings first, which I think is probably one of the hardest things in life, full stop. Whether it's with our child, whether it's with the person in Starbucks who's in front of us and making their order as complicated as possible, and we just want to get our coffee and go. There's so many triggers during the day. Compassion, so that goes back to what we were saying about how to try and respond to your children when they become dysregulated. Meet your child where they are. I think sometimes when our child is dysregulated, the reason it triggers a response in us is because we feel like we've failed. What have I done wrong to make my child behave like this? Or what's wrong with my child? That we get quite het up about it. Collaboration we've touched on. Consistency. One of the good ways to collaborate, particularly with one children, actually, is to give them choices. So we're leaving the house in 10 minutes, I want you to put your shoes on. Well, you can put this pair on, or this pair on. So you give them a choice, and you're kind of controlling it. That's an early form of collaboration with your child. Consistency, we can't be 100% consistent, but being as consistent as we can. We know that in our own lives, right? If we're starting new habits, it takes a few weeks of doing the same thing over and over before we start to integrate it in our lives. And celebration. What's working and doing more of it. And celebration doesn't have to be buying your children something or anything that is consumerist. It can be something as simple as, you know, having that chat at the end of the day at bedtime and having really positive affirmations that you tell your child. You know, I was so proud of you today when you managed to be responsible for completing your own homework, or you picked up your things and put them in your bag before you went to school. Be specific with the child. Try to get away from just saying, good job, well done. Try to be specific so the child understands what it is that you're proud of. So, self-regulation first. I'm going to go a little bit fast because I think I'm starting to run out of time very quickly. But this is about modeling behavior, practicing self-care and compassion for yourself. Taking time out for yourself to reflect on your parenting. Feeling safe with other parents. Having a community of support around you. And how do we learn to self-regulate? Through co-regulation. That's how we learn to regulate ourselves, right? I know a lot of you here are probably sitting here and thinking, my parents weren't very good at regulating when I was a child. And I bet that you have found sometimes in your life you've really struggled to regulate, right? Because you weren't shown it as a child. It wasn't modeled to you, and you've learned it as you've got older from doing your own research or being around people who have taught you how to do that. So co-regulation is when you're with your child or another person and you're just with them and helping them to stay calm. We'll go into a little bit more detail now, but a good example might be if you've had a friend who's lost a parent through bereavement or something like that. That's a good example. We kind of all know how to do that, right? We know we're just there for them if they need us. We don't try to put any of our thoughts into that person. We're just there and just supporting them. And that's kind of a good way to think about co-regulation. We'll skip through this, but back to the idea of self-compassion. That doesn't mean going to the spa or whatever it is that you like doing. That means being gentle in your own head, that dialogue, that narrative you have in your head. Are you setting unrealistic expectations for yourself? And how many adults do you know who can regulate their emotions fully? Exactly. It does get easier as you get older and become more experienced, but there's never like, I've got this, I'm an expert at it. So here we are, co-regulation. So co-regulation, I like to think about it as if we're riding a bike or teaching a child to ride a bike. Right at the start, you're simply getting the child used to, this is a bike, this is how you get on it, this is what a bike looks like. And then you slowly allow them to have more independence. Maybe you have the balance bike or the trainer wheels. And then eventually they start pedaling and balancing on their own. And that's what co-regulation is kind of like. When a child is young, we probably have to do it much more actively than when a child is older. And again, it depends on your own individual child. There's no like, at this age you need to do this, at that age you need to do that. And probably whatever you had to do when your child was 2 and 3 years old, you will have to do when your child is 13 and 14 and 15 years old, because children, they go through different stages in their life. It's very important when you're working with your child to be authentic. I mentioned before about how children can pick up on your vibes. And even if I was having a bad day or something had happened to me outside of work, I wasn't sharing it with the children in the class, but they could still feel from me that I was having a tough time. So if you're not authentic with your child and you're telling them you're okay when you're not, they're not going to feel safe. They're like, why is my mummy, why is my daddy telling me everything is all right and it's not? You think you're protecting your child, but I'm sure, I know myself, when I've had close family members who've been sick or in hospital, I'm living overseas, my family thinks sometimes it's better not to tell me so I don't worry about it. But actually, that causes quite a deep wound and a deep scar. You know, and it's the same with our children, not telling them things. Obviously, we have to be careful how we tell them things, but being authentic with everybody and with our children really helps us self-regulate and the other person as well. Otherwise, their nervous system gets those little feels and they can't quite work it out. So, we've looked at attachment. We've talked about being a role model and emotional regulation yourself. We're going to move through these. So a lot of what we're talking about is relational neurobiology, which is a very big scientific term for what we do every day, interacting with other people and having relationships with them. And relational mindfulness is doing that in a little bit more of an intentional way. So sometimes what we do as educators, particularly with young children, as you will see an educator just sitting in the corner of the room, and they will just be looking and watching and observing the children around them. Because quite often when you're actually in the moment interacting with a child, you miss things. So this is about being mindful and interacting with your child in a way where you're fully attentive, not judging yourself, not worrying who's watching you, not worrying whether you're right or wrong or whether the child is right or wrong, but just really connecting with the child for those 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is that's happening. And then active listening. This is something which, again, is something we encounter quite a lot probably in social media in our adult lives. I think there's Simon Sinek who talks about, he's very popular, talks about active listening as being a management tool or being a key to being a leader or being an entrepreneur. And again, active listening is a lot about what we were just talking about before, is being present and observing and trying to talk to your child in a way which doesn't let them feel like you're judging them. Same way as you don't judge yourself, don't judge your child. As children get older, they can sometimes understand things like, instead of saying, you're silly, that was a silly way to behave. But a lot of young children don't understand the difference between that. So think about the developmental stage that your child is at and what they're able to understand. It's about being curious about your child, curious about what they tell you and curious about what they're feeling and what they're going through. And about validating their feelings. When we validate somebody's feelings, it doesn't mean that we're accepting it as being right. Like when your partner says to you or your mum says to you, oh, I'm really sorry yesterday that I shouted at you or I snapped at you. You know, I was having a bad day. Right? And you can say, I understand that, or thank you for saying sorry. You know, that's about validation, right? You're not excusing it, but you're showing that you can understand and empathize with that person as to where that feeling came from. And you know, we often talk about zones of regulation in school, and we have the 4 different zones. All of those zones are perfectly valid. It's okay to be angry if it's an appropriate response to the situation. It's not appropriate to be angry and get really, really upset if a 12-year-old child has made a little mistake in their maths assessment, right? That's not an appropriate response. But if a child has spent ages putting their Lego together and their brother or sister had come and knocked it away and they're angry, that probably is an appropriate response. So it's about how appropriate is the response to the situation, but recognizing that all emotions are okay. And then co-regulation strategies. So a lot of the time, we need to practice these before the moment happens. It's like when we teach mindfulness techniques at school. We don't teach a child how to do their breathing patterns or how to, when we say to them, okay, tell me 5 things that you can see, 5 things that you can smell, 4 things that you can taste. Those techniques, you can't teach them in the moment. You've got to teach them beforehand and then use them in the moment. And a lot of these strategies are like that. They're things that you will put in place as daily routines, things that just happen, and then in the heat of the moment, when your toddler's having that tantrum or your 13-year-old is stomping their feet because, I don't know, their shoes aren't the right color, don't match all their friends' shoes or something. So establish routines and predictability. Routines are good for all of us. Our pets show us that, right? If we don't feed our pet, our dog or our cat at the regular time, they're going to let us know about it. Collaboration and choice, and we have touched on this. We can't let our children have, all the choices that are out there because that's not reasonable. But we can, some of the time, allow them to have choices that we're kind of in control of. Sometimes, some children, particularly children that I work with, they just can't do things. It's not that they don't want to do them, but they can't. And the example there is going to the mall when it's noisy and loud. I only go first thing at 10 o'clock in the morning. As soon as the mall starts to get too busy, I'm out of there. And I think it's a lot the same for our children. Especially children, remember, they're like this height, so all the world around them is bigger and, it can be quite intimidating. Physical touch and affection. When somebody's in a bad mood or you're having an argument or something like that, sometimes a very quick fix can be a hug. Or a hand on the shoulder when somebody starts to get a little bit anxious. Some children don't like that, but most will. Talking. I'll quite often sit beside children in the school when they're getting a little bit upset, and I'll just rabbit on about anything that comes into my head. I'll ask them what their favorite food is. I'll ask them if they've seen any movies. And it doesn't really matter what I'm saying, but I'm using a calm voice, and I just keep going, almost sometimes talking to myself. And eventually the child's little voice will pipe up and they'll ask me a question back or they'll respond to something. And that's when I know their nervous systems are starting to regulate again. We've talked about the deep breathing exercises. It seems like a little thing and we hear it absolutely everywhere, breathe. But you know what? What would happen if we stopped breathing? I'm trained in yoga and children's yoga and adult yoga as well, but I do a yoga club here with one of the groups of children in the ECAs. And when they come into the class, we kind of reverse it to what we would do in an adult class, and we do our breathing and relaxation at the beginning, because I want to get them out of the stimulation they've had from the day. And the last 2 weeks, I've had several of the children fall asleep and just stay asleep for the whole session. But the breathing, what I try to explain to the children is it's like a balloon, for example, right? Most of the day, especially when we're in heightened states of arousal in school, in workplaces, we're breathing at like this capacity of the balloon. It's going in and out, but it's never going all the way in or all the way out. And the oxygen that goes into our body is important, but the carbon dioxide that comes out of our body is important as well. So if we're always having that little bit of air that we're keeping inside our body, it kind of creates like toxins in our environment. So there's very real biological reasons why the deep breathing, emptying your lungs, even holding your breath, breathing out, and really exchanging the air. Even like if you do things like hold your arms up, that helps your lungs to let all the air out. And then I'm sure some of you who've done yoga, you know the various breathing techniques, one nostril, the other nostril, all of these things. And they really do have an impact. Sensory activities. Some children find this really relaxing, having something that they can squeeze in their hand. Or some children, we put Velcro under the desk and they run their fingers on the Velcro. It's kind of similar to children having their blankies or their soft toys when they're small. Mindfulness exercises. I quite often will say to a child, because it's much easier than the 5 things you can smell, 4 things you can do this, is just tell me 5 things that are red. And then they'll probably start to go to me, well, what about tomatoes? Do they count? They're not always, and then they've got so distracted, you might not even get to the end of the 5 things, but it's had the impact it's supposed to have had. Creating a calm corner or box. Put happy memories inside a pretty box, decorate it with your child. Put little things in there. They can be like maybe their favorite character from a cartoon, a little model of it or a picture of it, photos of friends, happy things which remind them, or a corner in their room full of their favorite things, soft cushions, blankets. Sometimes people use tents, teepees, to help the child have a safe space where they can go to calm down. Visual aids. So you have probably seen around the school, there's not one in here, but in quite a few places around the school, we've put up these emotional wheels. Now, a lot of children, they can tell you, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm tired. But that is maybe where their emotional language stops. On the wheels that we have in the school, some of the language is quite sophisticated. So again, you wouldn't expect a young child necessarily to use all of that. But when somebody says, I'm sad, talk to them about, well, why are you sad? Use visuals, use the emotion charts, use pictures of faces. There are lots of great books out there you can get on Amazon to help children dig a little bit deeper and start to peel back those emotions and be able to identify exactly what's going on. And then engage in co-regulated activities. Again, I know time isn't on our side in our lives, but what I used to do often when I used to teach 4-year-olds is I would have a table set up with Play-Doh on it right inside the door in the morning. Some of the children would be quite upset leaving their parents, or they would come in still sleepy, or they'd come in just off the bus where they'd had an argument with another child or sibling or something. They'd come and they'd sit down at the Play-Doh table. They would start to play with the Play-Doh quite silently to start with. But then as time goes on, they start to speak, they start to share, they start to interact with each other. And sometimes they start to express what they're feeling and sharing. A lot of times if we're doing something like a jigsaw puzzle or art, what we're actually doing is reflecting during that time, right? Our hands are busy with those activities, but our minds often aren't, so our minds start to relax and think about other things. So that can be a really good way for co-regulation and to bond with your child. Even as an adult, Play-Doh is quite fun. Make your own Play-Doh. Make it different colors, make it smelly. Whatever it is that you enjoy, gardening. A lot of children love gardening. And it doesn't have to be in a big garden outside the back of your villa. It can be in a little window box on your balcony. So, I'm 10 minutes late, sorry. I think we will send this out to parents. But this is me, and I'm the head of inclusion for primary. I think a lot of you probably see me in the reception area at various times. Feel free to come and talk to me at any time. Email me. I have an office that is kind of on the bit above the football field there. But if you ask reception, they will... Just call me Victoria. Everybody calls me Victoria, because my surname's too hard to say. Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening.